The chair lays out House Bill 5179 and recognizes Representative Plesa to, you ready?
I'm ready.
Representative Plesa to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Vice Chair, distinguished members. I'm honored to lay out House Bill 5179, the Texas Anti-Stealthing Act, before you today. Members, I like to keep my layouts short, so I apologize that this one is more in depth than normal. I feel a responsibility to share the stories of those who've come forward and those who have reached out to me and believe that I will value this and believe it will be of value to this committee when considering House Bill 5179. Before we begin, I would like to offer a disclaimer to the attendees and those streaming online that this bill covers topics of sexual assault. We will be discussing anatomy and medical devices and topics that may not be suitable for children. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to start off by telling you a little bit about a young woman named Rebecca and her story. Rebecca is a doctoral student living in a university town. When she's not working on her dissertation, she volunteers at a local rape crisis center. In that role, she often hears from undergraduate students at a nearby state college. A significant number of callers describe upsetting sexual contact that they struggle to name. Their partners have, during sex, removed a condom without their knowledge. Their stories often start the same way. I'm not sure if this was rape, but these accounts resonate with Rebecca because during her freshman year of undergrad, her boyfriend did the same thing to her. He removed his condom during sex without Rebecca's knowledge or consent. While Rebecca struggled to name what happened to her, it is a problem so prevalent it has its own name: stealthing. An online subcommunity of perpetrators has dubbed non-consensual condom removal as stealthing. 1 in 3 women and 1 in 5 men globally have been victims of stealthing. Some of their victims' hesitation stems from society's general misconceptions around sexual assault. A lot of us picture someone jumping out of the bush and raping us. The reality is, 8 out of 10 sexual assaults, the victim knows the rapist. It is often a friend, an acquaintance, a classmate, or a colleague. The other misconception around the elements of consent: it is not a free-for-all pass to do whatever you please. Consent is freely given, reversible, informed, enthusiastic, and specific. As I was made aware of this atrocity occurring in our state and around the world, I started combing through research articles, videos, and the internet to understand what was out there on this topic. I became aware of an online community centered around this topic. I'll briefly describe 2 of those to you. One group I found was a support group for survivors made up of mostly women drawing attention to this offense that shared information and resources to survivors on preserving evidence and getting a rape kit. The second group I found was rather disturbing and consisted of men who were fetishizing and bragging about stealthing. They posted written confessions, and some even posted graphic pornography that was recorded covertly. There was even a website, iblastinside.com, that instructs offenders on how to commit this assault. And gives tips and encouragement, by the way. They assume that it is a natural right for men to dominate and inseminate women, and that this right is so inherent that consent and free will is irrelevant. These offenders are brazen, they're emboldened, and they have not faced any repercussions or punishment. No one has stood up to them or dropped the swift hammer of justice upon them. And by God Almighty, I hope their time is up right now. I hope that Texas will lead on this issue and stand with survivors against assailants. I hope that you will join me in providing a legal avenue to those victims who have been forced to endure unprotected sex against their will. I hope that they find the courage to come forward and that prosecutors crack down on this offense, and that with the passage of the Texas Anti-Stealthing Act, we give survivors a meaningful avenue to redress. This isn't something online. The American Academy of Family Physicians and National Domestic Violence Hotline believes that stealthing is a serious public health issue. Survivors, interviews, and online accounts indicate that this action is most common among college-age adults, but is not regulated to that population. This practice puts partners at risk of unwanted pregnancies and for contraction of sexually transmitted infections. Survivors explain that they feel like a violation of trust and a denial of autonomy and free will. I hope that you will join me in affirming the feelings of these victims and sending a clear message that they have been indeed violated. And the Texas House will provide redress to these victims, that we will hold these assailants accountable to the letter of the law. House Bill 5179 seeks to help victims become survivors by creating a civil cause of action for non-consensual condom removal. Rebecca's story is one I read in a study published by the National Women's Law Center at Yale Law School. But let me share with you a story from one of my constituents, a young college student in my district, and her encounter with stealthing. Lily had been dating her boyfriend since high school when they decided to go to college together. Lily's boyfriend continued to pressure her into having sex even though she wanted to wait until marriage. Finally, one day, Lily gave in to the pressure, but she asked her boyfriend to wear a condom and he agreed. Lily did not realize that her boyfriend had removed the condom without her consent until after it was too late. She felt violated. She knew something was wrong that had happened to her, but she didn't know it had a name. Her boyfriend grew more sexually aggressive and started forcing himself on her regularly, creating an environment of sexual violence in their relationship that became routine. Members, that's what I want to impress upon you today. Stealthing is a form of assault. In the plainest terms, it is one person forcing another person to have unprotected sex. It is a tactic used by abusers to make decisions over the victim's body, to transmit disease, to coerce pregnancy. For abusers, it's about control and denying the victim's ability to make decisions. It's about depriving freedom. The Journal of Health Psychology published a peer-reviewed study in 2019 and found that more than 10% of the participants reported engaging in non-consensual condom removal. Researchers found that those offenders had a history of sexual aggression, hostility, and violence towards women. They were more likely to have partners with unintended pregnancies, and they were 30 times more likely to spread disease. I've gone through so much research but this is what sticks with me, the personal accounts from those who have experienced this offense. That's what I hope sticks with you. Please don't let these survivors be reduced to a statistic. I hope you remember Lily's story and highlight how stealthing is a precursor and indicator to more disturbing behavior and sentiments. Her boyfriend first violated her consent by forcing her to have unprotected sex. Then he continued to violate her and subject her to violence, coercion, and rape. I hope you keep Louisa's story in mind when considering this legislation too. Louisa was also violated by her boyfriend in the same manner as Lily. A few weeks after her boyfriend assaulted her, she learned she was pregnant. When she told her boyfriend, he demanded that she abort her pregnancy immediately. Louisa refused, and he insisted she would carry the pregnancy to term. Her boyfriend threatened to beat her up if she refused to get an abortion. This offense isn't relegated to college campuses. It's happening all over Texas, in each of our districts, even in this building, the People's House. Members, if you will review the written testimony that's been submitted to this committee, you will come across Daisy's testimony, a former staffer. Mr. Chairman, if I may, I'd like to read a portion of her submitted testimony for the committee. When she was 22 years old, she was a victim of stealthing, didn't realize there was a name for it, but she knew she had been violated. These are her words. My story is not unique. I was on a date with a person who I thought I could trust. I had no idea what had happened until it ended. Once it was over, I realized that the condom was no longer there. To my shock, my partner blew it off like it was no big deal. I had to ask and demanded, "Did you take the condom off?" He answered casually, "Yes, I thought you knew. I thought you could feel the difference." No, I couldn't. I had no idea. I felt rage, anxiety crept over me. I questioned myself. I was devastated. This is a story that happens too often. This experience at an early age left me with lasting effects concerning consent. Stealthing is not okay. Stealthing is sexual assault. Women who've experienced this are left with confusion and a lifelong trauma affecting their ability to trust and form healthy relationships in the future. Survivors have a right to seek redress and deserve to recover damages for injury done to them. House Bill 5179 creates a legal avenue for survivors of stealthing to seek justice from their persecutors. We have created a cause of action that hones in on the specific elements of this offense. 1, the removal of the condom without the person's knowledge. When someone puts on a condom, there is a reasonable presumption that that will remain on for the duration of the activity. After the removal, the defendant continued to make sexual... Number 2, after the removal, the defendant continues to make sexual contact with the individual. In the plainest terms, force the individual to have unprotected sex. I've consulted criminal judges and prosecutors in North Texas, and they've advised me that we can already prosecute under the aggressive offenses. A civil case will allow victims to recover damages and have a voice and some control over these cases. The evidentiary standard for this case would be the preponderance of evidence and allows a judge to provide appropriate injunctive relief and allows a jury to award claimant who prevails actual damages, including mental anguish, court costs, and reasonable attorney fees. A jury may award exemplary damages when appropriate. The reason that so many are hearing of this for the first time is because of the confusion I described earlier. Our laws should reflect the sentiments and reality of today's society, and I hope that you will join me in sending a message through action and law that we will make these offenders think twice and provide survivors meaningful relief. What they've experienced will stick with them for a lifetime, and not just mentally, physically as well. These could leave victims with permanent PTSD. We need to send a clear message that stealthing is hideous, immoral, and an illegal act for those suffering, and those suffering can seek redress. I see we have over 4 dozen witnesses who have registered in support of this bill, and oddly enough, there are 2 people registered in opposition. I'm truly perplexed by this, as no one has reached out to our offices with concern or opposition, and I'm very curious to know who these 2 people are that support sexual assault being perpetrated in our great state. Members, as I mentioned, over 4 dozen groups and individuals have registered in support of this legislation. I hope to earn all of your support for the Texas Anti-Stealthing Act, and I'm honored that Ms. Lavinia Masters herself has come down here from North Texas to testify before this esteemed committee. Members, many of you may remember Ms. Masters, after whom the Lavinia Masters Act, which was passed in the 86th legislative session and was a priority bill HB 8 for the House. Ms. Masters knows how sexual assault leaves a lasting impact on survivors and how hard it can be to seek justice through the criminal court system. I'm happy to answer any questions for the committee, and after Ms. Masters' testimony, I respectfully reserve my right to close.
Okay. Thank you, Representative members. Any questions? Okay. Thanks for bringing this bill. The chair calls. Thank you, and you've got your right to close. The chair calls Lavinia Masters for the bill, and then I have Adam Kahn, who's registered against this bill. Adam Kahn, who's registered against this bill. Is he here? Okay, I guess he just didn't want to testify. Okay. Ms. Masters, it's great to see you again. The chair calls Lavinia Masters. I have you here on behalf of Hope Saves and yourself, registered for House Bill 5179. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Good. It's great to see you again. And you're
Thank you. Great to be here. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and thank you for House Representative Plesa for bringing this important bill, House Bill 5179, to your attention about stealthing. Those of you that know my story, I am a survivor of a heinous sexual assault at the age of 13 years old. Although I did know my perpetrator, I did live for years with the fear of did I have, and to this day, I still take HIV testing, even though I've been married 33 years, but that was one of my triggers was a disease or would I become pregnant from not having a condom, and that was being a victim of a stranger. But me working as an advocate now for survivors of sexual assault and just being an advocate, period, I do a lot of speaking at schools, and at the Plano School District, I did a event for this past August, and sharing with the students about consent, because that's what this takes us back to, is to consent. In other words, mutual respect for one another when you decide to engage in certain activities such as sex. And what I've learned, or what I taught them was when that condom is removed, it is no longer consent. That young man had made the decision on his own that he was going to take another route when it comes to that sexual activity that they were engaged in. I also told them, now go home and make sure you're not telling your mamas that Miss Lavinia said we can have sex as long as we have a condom on, but just to be safe, because we know young folks will do what they want to do anyway. But when it comes down to consent, that's disrespectful, that's deceitful, that's unethical, and it's unacceptable. And what happened is after my event with Plano School District, I had a lot of young folks reach out to me on my website and say, Miss Lavinia or Mrs. Masters, I think I was raped. I think this happened to me. I was violated because he told me that he would wear a condom, and I later learned that that condom was removed. This was very traumatizing for them. This was very frustrating for them. It was very frustrating for me to hear that, because once again, we are back to consent. And what does consent mean to an individual? How do we train our young folks? How do we train society? How does the state of Texas look at what consent is? And House Bill 5179 lays that out. No one has a right to make a decision on whether or not you're going to impregnate someone or possibly give me a disease without me being involved in that. A lot of them are already pressured into that sexual activity, and some are not, but still, we still have to draw that line of what consent is. So mutual respect is why we're really here today when it comes to survivors of sexual violence. If I decide that I'm going to be engaged with you sexually and we decide that we're going to use protection, you should respect that as an individual. You should respect me as an individual. You should respect my rights as a person. You should see me for who I am. And if we say we're going to use protection, we must use protection. But if you make that decision to remove that condom during that act, you have now committed a crime against me. You have now violated me. You have violated my space. You have violated my trust. You have violated me as an individual, and that is no longer consent. And there should be some kind of action that I should be able to take against you if I decide, if I'm not filled with so much fear or uncertainty because my state or people don't understand what consent is. And in closing, we have to get to that point of what consent is. That it sounds redundant, but we don't hear it enough when we say consent. And so I want to make sure today that we understand what we're really focusing on, and we are protecting survivors of sexual violence, and we're training our young folks the proper way, even our older folks, when it comes to what consent is, and removing or stealthing in this instance is against the law, and it should be some kind of punishment for it. Thank you. Have any questions, feel free to ask me.
Thank you, Ms. Masters. Members, any questions? All right, thank you for your
Thank
testimony,
you.
as always.
All right, thank you.
Anyone else wish to testify on, for, or against 5179, House Bill 5179? Okay, seeing none, the chair recognizes Representative Plesa to close on her bill.
Thank you. Members, I know we've used some uncomfortable language today, but these are medical and legal terms, and if it seems graphic, that's because the nature of this battery is graphic. In the plainest of terms, victims have been forced to have unprotected sex, and they deserve a legal avenue, meaningful relief. I'd like to thank those who testified, Dr. Masters, who is on the governor's sexual assault task force, those who have been brave enough to submit their written testimonies, and those who have confided in me with their experiences. Thank you to Chairman Moody for joint authoring this bill with me, and for the chairman for bringing this up for a vote. This issue is widespread, prevalent. Creating justice for survivors is a topic worthy of our time and worthy of debate by the whole House. Members, I ask that each of you will carefully consider the merits of this legislation and vote aye. And with that, I close.
All right, thank you. Representative Slauson.
I have just a question here. Thank you for bringing this, and hard conversations, we have them all the time. My question is, in the damages section, when it talks about the potential for appropriate injunctive relief, I just wasn't sure what might be contemplated that when we're dealing with something that has already occurred.
Yes. So I am not an attorney. I'll be honest, I had to consult numerous attorneys, both civil and criminal, to get a grasp on what the need is and how the nuts and bolts of this procedure would work. As you know, injunctive relief can typically only be granted when there is no other remedy under the law, and that irreparable harm will occur in the absence of relief. It is up to the judge to make this determination and determine the appropriate injunction. One example I've heard was a situation in the Panhandle region. Multiple women came forward with enough evidence that the same individual had spread gonorrhea to multiple women. The women claimed that the disease was intentionally spread by the defendant, and the judge granted injunctive relief as the case proceeded. The injunctive prohibited the defendant from engaging in sexual activity until the court could determine that he no longer had gonorrhea and that would no longer pose a threat and cause irreparable harm.
Okay. And when we're specifically talking about purposeful removal here and not
Accident. This is intentional. This is an intent to deceive the person that you're having this act with.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative, who, obviously, we know that the situations that you've described where it's the person not wearing the condom that has the cause of action, but what about a situation where, and I've heard and I've read, I'm just reading a couple instances now where that person might unknowingly to the person wearing the condom actually, put a hole in it or remove it during.
Yeah, so that actually happened in Germany. There was a woman that was found guilty of purposely poking holes in condoms. That would not be covered under this, but I would love to work with you on a committee sub if you wanted to do something like that.
Are we sure that wouldn't be?
I don't believe so because of the way the bill is written, but it has
because
been
it's removing.
Yeah, because the word of removing. So, but I have that has been weighing on me, honestly. And so but I just don't know how we would.
Yeah, I think there's some, because I understand the intent of the bill, and it's obviously a growing problem that we need to be serious about and try to address. But I think that there's more there's more to it situationally, and we have to be clear in terms of who has the cause of action, who's the plaintiff, who's the defendant, who's liable to whom, and I just am seeing some. Parts of the bill that I think can be strengthened, and I'll talk.
Well, I would love to work with you to make this an even stronger bill.
All right, members, any questions? Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Representative.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate you laying this out.
I appreciate your consideration. Thank you.
With that, the chair will leave House Bill 5179 pending at this time.